Hello, and welcome to a different episode of Double AD today, where I'll be taking one of my favorite bands of all time, perhaps my favorite top band of all time, the blood-spitting, fire-breathing, blow shit up in your face, grab your cock, it's time to rock. You wanted the best, you got the best, the hottest band in the land, Kiss! Welcome to Atlantis After Dark. This is your old pal, the old school AB, here to count down my favorite Kiss records from worst to first. And bear in mind that this is just my opinion. Yours might be different. If it is, tell me. Hit me up in the comments. I'm not afraid to fight a guy over a rock band that wears more makeup and higher heels than your mother. But since you guys are going to be cool, there's no need for that shit, is there? Alright. But there is a trigger warning for all the technical derps who might stumble across this one day and think, how did he not include albums like Alive 3? What an asshole! And yeah, I'll say it, I'm an asshole, but this is not just an all-inclusive list. In other words, not every single official release is going to be reviewed here. I just can't without being unfair and boring and repetitive. And we won't be including some of the following records either because they're redundant or don't feature enough original reworked songs or don't contain any otherwise noteworthy contributions to the catalog itself. So that means nothing like Alive 35, no Off the Soundboard, no Kiss Symphony. I'm also not ranking bootlegs or demos. This is just official releases, right? And I'm sure I'll get flack for it, but like I said, there are some albums I don't think belong on my worst to first list. That doesn't mean the records are bad. Some of them are actually pretty decent, but I can't review an album in full due to what I think is a lack of original material. So, like I said, this is my list, and if you don't like it, feel free to shout into the void of the internet below and let everyone know what big brains you have. Alright. Here are some of my honorable mentions, some of which are great, and others make me scratch my head, like this one. Double Platinum. This record was released as a greatest hits compilation in 1978 as a way to drive record sales while the band recorded their solo albums. Just before they left to do that, they all collaborated on some changes and tweaks to what would eventually wind up being called Double Platinum. Yes, there are reworked songs, and there's a new version of Strutter called Strutter 78, which I dig. Some of the other edits I'm not crazy about, and we can talk about them in just a bit. You have to remember that the 70s were a different time, and if you were lucky enough to have been a part of it, you'll understand that any new Kiss material just flew off the shelves faster than a cheetah with a Roman candle up its ass. Look, Strutter 78 is a good track, and I love the new disco fried feel. It sounds like something you could play at Studio 54 in the late 70s, which I think was the goal. And you might have been the precursor, Strutter 78, or at least the seed of the idea of what sparked I Was Made for Lovin' You just a year later. Some of the other edits on this record, right? Hard Luck Woman was chopped up a bit. I'm not sure why the drum track was removed from the first verse. I don't think it adds anything to it or changes much. It's just there. Calling Dr. Love has a new fancy growling vocal intro from Gene about how he's the doctor of love or whatever he's saying there, but again, not sure why. Nothing was wrong with the original tracks. In fact, I think the original tracks are better. They did the same thing to Firehouse. They didn't really edit it. What they did was they tuned it up half a step, or they sped it up or something. It sounds horrible, and it made no sense when there's literally no other changes made to that song. Other songs like Detroit Rock City is missing the Ezra and Car Crash intro, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And the Rock Bottom intro, that's the other thing. It's now attached to She, which also has an alternate ending for no reason whatsoever. They also changed the ending of Black Diamond. I'm not sure I like one over the other, this version or the other studio version. I guess I'll always hold the original version and the Alive versions of this song as the source of truth, but this version isn't terrible. And it's a good thing I never listened to this record outside of Strutter 78 because unless I'm listening to that song, I don't have a reason to reach for this record. And if you are not a diehard Kiss fan, I wouldn't recommend this being your gateway into the band because There are so many changes to the original tunes that it's not worth listening to, in my humble opinion. Bear in mind, this wasn't released to be a brand new record. This was released as a Kiss's greatest hits compilation. I think it was their very first greatest hits compilation. And it came out on a shiny foil album cover, which is why people bought it, because it was shiny. Ooh, shiny albums. But anyways, that's why I can't rank this album. Up next, Killers. I debated on including this release as an official review on the list, but 4 new songs are not quite an EP. You need 5 tracks to really be an effective EP. And the rest of the tracks are just a greatest hits compilation, a la Double Platinum. Unfortunately, each new track is more terrible than the next here. Well, Nowhere to Run is kind of cool, but the other 3 songs suck. Killers was originally supposed to be a stopgap in the Kiss records to keep the Kiss albums on the shelves. It was basically crapped out as an overseas release, but some places in the States carried it too. Back then, many retailers had deals inked with the sellers to hold a certain number of records on their shelves as long as the band released a new album within a certain time frame. And that was usually tied to the previous album's release date. And BT Dubs, now you know why Kiss has so many fucking records. The strategy was to put out albums. It didn't matter if they were good as bad, as long as they were making money and keeping their records on the shelves for kids to buy. This was released at a time when they didn't really have a solid musical direction, and as a result, the money was dwindling fast because the Elder had flopped big time. They scrapped together an entire tour if there was ever going to be one for the Elder, and they had yet to hook up with Vinnie Vincent to write songs for the Creatures album, so this was kind of in limbo, and not in a good way. Peter had left the band 2 years prior, Ace was on his way out of the band, and Eric Carr was still green as fuck, and he was not super enthused, but what could he do? He was just a hired gun, you know? They got Bob Kulick from Alive 2 to come in and handle some of the guitar solos. It was pretty much a shit show. It was a race to toss a log onto a dying fire, it almost seems like. And with the tracks like these, it's easy to see why. Like Nowhere to Run, probably the best out of the 4 new tracks. At least the song still has some balls, even though they slicked the production, and dare I say it, there's some ridiculous guitar work on here by Bob Kulick, and not in a good way. He wasn't even a member of Kiss, and he's playing lead guitar on these new tracks, bending his strings until it sounds like you're gonna fucking snap. But I digress. Partners in Crime, complete schlock, down on your knees, pathetic. Sounds like an AC/DC ripoff. I'm a Legend Tonight, just plain fucking weird. I don't understand what all the breathy chorus lines of the all that crap is in there for. And I mean, at least the guitar solo on this song was done with some taste, but that's about as much as I can say for it. All in all, this is a greatest hits filler record with 4 new tracks. I can't rank this album. Shikara, another greatest hits record. I'm not going to talk much about this one, but the most notable track on this album is the extended disco version of I Was Made for Lovin' You, which clocks in at 8 minutes long. So if you're into that, check it out and shake what your mama gave you. It's a cool version if you're into disco or if you love Kiss, but for everyone else, it's going to be an extra 4 minutes of extra drippy cheese you didn't ask for. So I can't rank this album. Smashes, thrashes, and hits. On this record, there's only 2 new songs, but they suck worse than all the new songs on Killers combined. These 2 new songs make the stuff on Killers make it sound like Black Sabbath, okay? I'm not going to mince words. First up, let's put the X and Sex as god-awful. It might be one of the worst, schlockiest, most cringiest things Kiss has ever done, and I'm including Read My Body on that list. This is just the drizzling shits of a song. It really does illustrate that the band had no identity at the time. They were just songs. The other new track, Rock Hard, I think it is, isn't really even worth mentioning because next to X and Sex, it sounds like a fucking 80s masterpiece. And yes, Rock Hard is a song that's exactly what you think about. You make me rock hard, baby, all night. Buy me a ticket to Pukesville. Ugh, tell me you're a pervert without saying it. You know, if you're gonna write such obviously tasteless lyrics, thank God the music is actually awful too, so that way you never have to listen to this crap for any reason ever. So, I can't rank this record. Alive 3. There's no original material on this record, even though it's a beloved release. This is more of a bookshelf piece to me than anything else. No new ground was covered here. You know, I'm also not going to review Alive 4, Symphony, Alive 5, Alive 35, Off the Soundboards, The Greatest Kiss, The Very Best of Kiss, Kiss Gold, Kiss Silver, because there's literally nothing new or noteworthy on those records, and nothing that I would go out of my way to recommend to a casual fan. So basically any live album or greatest hits compilation not already listed or not already spoken about, for all the reasons mentioned, are off the review list. Things like You Wanted the Best. It's a nice live compilation, but if you think the 4 new rare tracks on that album are actually live, I have a space shuttle I'd like to sell you. Also, I don't like that dumb interview with Jay Leno. Why is that even on the album? I'm sure some might argue that Symphony had some cool moments, and I would tend to agree, but cool moments of select songs with just an orchestra behind them doesn't make a good record. It was even passé when they released it, and I don't think it holds up to a second listen. Although, they did a bang-up job with God of Thunder, I'll say that. The Symphony sounded really awesome on that tune. And sure, they do rare live songs in an acoustic set, but what's different, right? A live version of Shandy? Great Expectation with a boys choir? That's not fucking rock and roll. Give me a break. We also won't be covering the full gambit of greatest hits albums, and that also includes the box set, Kiss 40 Icons, or the best of the solo albums. I think what we have here is a pretty comprehensive enough album list to rank and review, as I think most Kiss fans would agree that this covers about 100% of any albums people would spin. So, for those reasons and all above, I can't rank any of the albums that I previously mentioned. Now, for everything else, it's all in play. All the studio records, Alive 1 and 2 because of the EP at the end. The solo records, I'm counting those as official Kiss releases. Yes, they have the Kiss logo in the corner. And Unplugged. Why Unplugged? You're right. It meets most of the same criteria as the other albums, and it's basically just an acoustic greatest hits compilation. But this album is more remarkable for being, in my opinion, the actual reunion of the original 4, plus the fact that there were actually 6 members of Kiss at one point on the same album. Of course that's a noteworthy record. It's super noteworthy for a variety of reasons. So there's no way I'm not including it on my review since it's a record I listen to all the time. And you know what? It's my list. And I'll do what I wanna. Do what I wanna do. Yeah. I'm also leaving in Alive 2 for reasons I already mentioned. There's enough new material, aka an EP, on side 4. Those of you who are old school will know what that means, side 4. Side 4 on the record to warrant it, and it'll be fun for you guys to see where the live albums, Alive 1 and 2, kind of rate on my list. As for Alive itself, while yes, there are no new songs on the record, I think the live versions of a lot of these songs outperform their studio counterparts. Plus, this is the record that brought them into the big time, so I think it has to be on a list of any ranked Kiss albums. And again, I spin this record a lot, so I can't not include it. And I know there's a lot I'm leaving out, right? Obscure songs, both of the originals re-releases, the Japanese singles, Don't Tug My Ascot, for God's sakes. Maybe one day they'll release the entire catalog as an Apple-only release with every studio song, track by track. If they do that, maybe I'll rank the 400 plus songs that they have in their catalog, but until then, this is where you gotta go. For now, let's get into it. 27 albums to go, it has to be someone. Who's on the bottom of the pile? The Peter Criss solo album, number 27. You gotta start somewhere, right? I don't know what to say about this record. As far as albums go, this is one of them. In 1978, the band thought it would be a good idea for them to release solo albums on the same day. And history tells us what happened shortly thereafter. This was the beginning of the end for Kiss in the 70s. What they thought was going to be the thing that made customers happy, selling 4 times the Kiss, was a huge calculated mistake. Instead, people only bought 1 or maybe bought 2 of the records, depending on circumstances, or in the consumer's case, musical tastes, or, you know, income inequality. This is likely because fans wanted 4 times the Kiss, but didn't want 4 times the cost. And if you think about it, it just makes sense. In a perfect world, you'd have thought the solo albums would have yielded 4 kick-ass rock albums. But again, you'd be wrong. And I want to be careful here because I love Peter Criss. He was my first favorite member of the band when I was a kid. His howling vocals and pounding drum beats, they were enough to get anyone's feet moving, and that's just not what this album was. This is Peter's jazz album or something, old swing, jazz, and other genres that were generally listened to by your grandparents served as the inspiration for this record. In fact, nobody on planet Earth would listen to this and guess that it came from a member of Kiss. And no, that's not a good thing. Kiss was a rock band, man. They had an edge, they had a mystique, and, you know, now thanks to Peter's album, they had a bona fide dude. I don't think I've ever warmed up to a lot of these songs. This is a dated sounding album. Maybe one exception, I Can't Stop the Rain. While it's a good song, it doesn't belong anywhere near a Kiss record, and neither does that cover of Tossin' and Turnin', which is absolutely terrible, but to be fair, the rest of the album is too. Word on the street is Peter didn't even play drums on his own record, which is kind of puzzling, but whatever. You can totally skip this record, you're not missing anything, really. Next. Clocking in at number 26. Gene Simmons solo record from 1978. Yeah, so the solo albums are divisive, to say the least. If you judge a book by its cover, you might think this record is going to kick all kinds of ass. But nothing could be further from the truth. That Gene Simmons, a classic bait and switch man if there ever was one, right? I'm going to save a lot of time on this portion of the review because I don't have a lot of great things to say about a couple of these solo records. The only song I really like off this record is Radioactive, and even on this recording, it doesn't have any balls, man. I love the way it starts with that haunting Devil's Triad. It makes you think you're going to get an album of heavy, balls-to-the-wall rippers like God of Thunder and Dr. Love and Almost Human, but no. We get fucking an album full of songs that would be better fitted on a Beatles album, and that's not a bad thing if you're a Beatles fan, but it sucks if you're a Kiss fan. If you look at from the frame that it's a collaboration between Gene and the Beatles, it makes total sense. But that's not what Kiss fans wanted. It completely misses the point of doing the solo records to a Kiss fan from their perspective. We should have gotten 4 really good Kiss records, and instead we got Peter's experimental 1940s swing fusion jazz record, and Gene Simmons trying to make the last Beatles album. Not off to a good start. The rest of these songs are mostly passable. See You Tonight is okay, but again, I don't really consider it a Kiss song. The whole record just sounds sanitized, like it was run through human resources before approval or something. Every bit of rough edge that Gene represented in the band is completely polished away here. And worst of all, his solo record ends with a cover of, wait for it, When You Wish Upon a Star. If that isn't enough reason for you to think this album is that low on the list, I don't know what is. The rule is simple. If you release a solo record with a fucking Disney cover, you're going straight to the bottom of the fucking heap. Next record. Asylum. Coming in at 25. Who boy. Kiss in the 80s, am I right? This is going to be somewhat controversial, but I feel the bottom of this list might be a bit too harsh on some of the 80s lineups, which unfortunately saw a revolving door of guitar players. And that's probably why, you know, a lot of the 80s albums are low on my list. But this one, in my opinion, is by far the most disjointed and terrible Kiss studio record ever recorded. Look, there's a couple of good tracks on here. Good, not great. I have to keep in mind that this is Bruce Kulick's first record, and it shows here. He's clearly struggling to find his footing in the band. And while I dig King of the Mountain and Tears Are Falling, I think the rest is a huge letdown. Trial by Fire? Bad. Objectively bad. I'm Alive is worse. Who Wants to Be Lonely? Who wants to listen to this horrible record? Not me. There's only one other song you might be interested in checking out if you're morbidly curious, and that's All Night, which is cute, but it's an outright comedic attempt to recreate the success of Rock and Roll All Night. And as you could probably guess, it did not accomplish the goal it set out to achieve. The whole album just sounds like butt rock to me. Basically, this is Kiss trying to compete with other bands and failing. And unfortunately, if you're going to see that, you're going to see there's a pattern that'll emerge with some of these records when they try to follow a trend instead of doing their own thing, which is what any self-respecting Kiss fan wants. That's all you want. I'll pass on this record, thank you. It's the worst studio record in the entire catalog, and that's saying something. Up next, clocking in at number 24, Crazy Nights. When this record starts out with a Ric Flair like, woo, you know you're in trouble. You know the record is probably doomed from the start. And although I don't think Crazy Nights is that good of a track, I do like I'll Fight Hell to Hold You, and I also dig the intro to No, No, No. But yeah, that's about it. Bruce and Eric are really in top form when they rip through an otherwise boring, bland, and tepid release. But the synthesizers and just the general polishing, their attempt to follow trends leads them down a path where they just sound uncomfortable as a band. I mean, listen to some of these Paul's gymnastics on these vocals from My Way and Reason to Live, which sounded like a horrible Great Value movie soundtrack ripoff song. Or maybe that would be used for a love montage somewhere, but nobody is going to be listening to that song on repeat, right? Thief in the Night is okay, but I like the Wendy O. Williams version better. The rest of the album is really, really unremarkable. Bang Bang You might be one of the top worst Kiss songs of all time. It's right up there with Read My Body and Put the X in Sex. That's why these records are so low. I don't know what kind of pills Paul Stanley was popping back then, but they clearly did not help his direction. Really, really, really bad record. Skip this one. Huge miss for the record, huge miss for Kiss. So if you listen to some of the demos, Time Traveler and Sword and Stone, if they'd have put those albums or those songs on the record, it might have been okay. It might have ranked higher. But huge, huge, huge miss. Next. In at 23, Hot in the Shade. We take a trip down to the late 90s on this one. I'm sorry, the late 80s on this one. Oops. This was 89, and an album that would sadly be Eric Carr's last album as the drummer on Kiss. 2 years later, he would pass away from heart cancer, which also happened to be on the same day Freddie Mercury died in 1991, which is just a weird, coincidental piece of rock history. This is the biggest, longest studio record of all time, with 15 songs, and the record clocks in at almost an hour. I guess they thought less is more was overrated. There are some okay songs on here, but there are also some really bad ones too. Songs like Rise to It, Hide Your Heart, and Boomerang are good songs. Forever is okay. Little Caesar is okay. The rest of the record is somewhere between heaven and hell. You get it? God, these tracks they're just not as offensive as they are boring. King of Hearts is boring. Cadillac Dreams is boring. Prisoner of Love is boring. But the real crimes on this album come in the form of, quite possibly, the worst Kiss song ever recorded, ever. And I'm talking about Read My Body. Ugh. I don't know what's up with that stupid cowbell, the percussive noises, and I don't even understand what the song is about, talking on one end about reading his brain and then reading his body if you want to know what's on his mind. It's just confusing and stupid sexist schlock. He was clearly out of touch at this point, trying to copy Def Leppard. Give me a break. I'll tell you guys something. I listened to almost every one of these records in their entirety before doing these reviews, in some cases for the first time in years, and this is one of them, and I'm just here to tell you this song is bad. Objectively bad all the way around. In fact, my favorite part of the song is when it's over. This record is so bad it's not even funny. Just avoid it. If this had been released as an EP with Rise to It, Hide Your Heart, Little Caesar, Boomerang, and Betrayed, it would have been an okay release. There was 10 songs too many on this thing. I mean all of the other songs are pretty much worthless. Skip this record. Next. All right, clocking in at number 22, we have Monster. Now we're going to get into some of the albums that I don't necessarily have hate for, but there are still more songs that I actually, like on them more than I dislike on them. And now that we're here, let's talk about Monster. This is the last studio record that Kiss ever released, and while some of the songs are good, the album's overall production is just not great. It sounds like I'm listening to a brick wall. Songs like Hell or Hallelujah, Freak, and The Devil Is Me are actually pretty good Kiss songs for being written by 60-something-year-old men. Other songs like A Wall of Sound, Back to the Stone Age are okay, but Shout, Mercy, Long Way Down, Eat Your Heart Out, Take Me Down Below, Last Chance, they're all just forgettable. As is Right Here, Right Now, which is the last track they released, I think. Don't get me wrong, they're not offensive songs. They're not, musically or lyrically offensive by any stretch. They're just boring. And I can't get into them at all. And out of those songs, none of them have ever really grown on me. Out of This World and All for the Love of Rock and Roll are pretty much slack. So, and plus the elephant in the room on this record is Paul's vocals. He can kind of control it in the studio to a degree, but by this time, you're really hearing it in the studio. And especially live, his performances really suck because his voice sounds like it was dragged through the wood chipper. You can really hear it too. It's sad because he was at one point one of the best vocalists of all time, and it's just sad to see what he's become in recent years. But I digress. Nevertheless, terrible record. Don't listen to it if you don't want to. Nothing happened here of any consequence. Let's move ahead to the next one. In at 21, Carnival of Souls. Like many other records that wind up lower on the ranking list, this was an attempt to follow trends rather than just do their own thing. Carnival of Souls was the result of Paul and Gene basically saying, and I quote, "We were making a new band for Bruce and Eric." And that's a really weird thing to say because Bruce and Eric at this point had been in the band together for 5 years. The funny thing about this record is that it came out after the reunion tour. The record was supposed to be released in 95 or 96, I think, but the original four decided to reunite during that time and do a huge worldwide tour in makeup for the first time ever since 1979. So, in an effort not to confuse the fans, they shelved the release of this album. The problem is, this all was happening at the same time when the music piracy industry was starting to explode. And Carnival of Souls was one of the first victims of being leaked online in a brand new format called MP3. Ooh, how old am I, right? Eventually, rather than continue to eat their losses, they finally released it in 1997. And the reaction amongst the larger fan base who didn't have access to the leaked record for whatever reason was not good. Even when the album leaked, the diehards, including me, were somewhat disappointed. That isn't to say the record hasn't grown on me a bit in recent years. It has. Some of the songs on here are really good and worth a listen. You just can't go into it thinking of listening to Kiss. This is Kiss if they did an Alice in Chains record. I sometimes refer to this record as the elder of the 90s because it's just so radically different musically than the rest of their catalog that it kind of deserves its own spot in that echelon. However, unlike the elder, this record is largely forgettable, and it's another footnote in the larger grand experiment to make new music for Kiss. I applaud them for trying to go there, but if you're looking at this from a pure Kiss standpoint, it does not hold up to the rest of their catalog, and you're lying to yourself if you say otherwise, right? Check out songs like Hate, Rain, and Master of Slave. Jungle is a song that really smokes and moves. Other songs like Childhood's End and In My Head and The Mirror, they're just not that memorable. A couple of other notable mentions here. The song Seduction of the Innocent is actually a song about the Comics Code Authority and about censorship, which I always thought was kind of cool since Gene is a big comic book fan, and look, that's what I do too. I do comic books. So, of course, I have a soft spot in my heart for this song, but it's not very good. It kind of has a Middle Eastern vibe to it, which I think kind of makes it cool, but the lyrics are just confusing against that backdrop. But yeah, whatever. I don't know shit about music or anything, right? The last track on this album, I think, is fronted vocally by longtime guitar player Bruce Kulick, who makes his vocal debut. And while I may not like the track, it is notable since there have only been 2 members of Kiss who never sang lead on an album. Those 2 members are Mark St. John and Vinnie Vincent, but we can talk a little bit about those when we get to their spots on the countdown, maybe, if I feel like it. Up next, coming in at 20, Animalize, on the bottom of the middle of the list. I don't know how else to say that. Coming in at number 20, it's Animalize, which I think out of the 3, it's the 3rd best studio album of the non-makeup years. I don't know, or I'm sorry, that wasn't 3 albums. How many non-makeup albums were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6? So I think it's about the midpoint, yeah. Out of all the non-makeup studio albums, I think it's the 3rd best. That's how I say that, right? I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is what it is. It sounds less dated to my ears than Asylum, Crazy Nights, and Hot in the Shade, so at least it's got that going for it, right? But generally speaking, this record is kind of hit and miss with me. It just feels kind of tepid compared to better 80s releases. It's hard to believe we went from Lick It Up to this, and maybe that's why it's lower on the list, because Lick It Up was such a kick-ass record, and then we got this. The departure of Vinnie Vincent was really felt here, and I don't like Mark St. John's playing. It just doesn't fit Kiss, in my opinion. It's so far left of what both Ace and Vinnie did that it's kind of distracting when you hold it up against the rest of the catalog. Having said that, there are some bright spots on the record. I've Had Enough, Into the Fire, Heaven's on Fire, they seem to like fire on this record, and Under the Gun are all pretty decent tracks, but the rest of this album to me is, again, kind of forgettable. I could not hum the chorus to Get All You Can Take or While the City Sleeps with a gun to my head. I didn't even know who did lead vocals on some of these tracks until I re-listened to it today when I was making the list. And honestly, it's only higher than the non-makeup albums I listed because it's largely non-offensive, with one exception. And I quote, "I want to get down, I want to get on your case, I want to put my log in your fireplace. So burn, bitch, burn, woo, ooh, ooh." Yeah, the least we say about that song, the better. Honestly, this record would probably be higher if the song was left off the record. This is one of those worst 5 Kiss songs that we were talking about. I think that's what Gene thought was provocative at the time, but whatever, I don't care. Animalize is a very skippable record. Mark St. John would be out of the band shortly after due to medical reasons, which brings in Bruce Kulick on Asylum, which we talked about earlier, which I think makes it the worst Kiss studio record, which is just the revolving door of musicians that came through the band at the time. Having said that, there's nothing on this record you should particularly check out beyond the 3 tracks I mentioned, unless you're into masochism, by all means. Tell me you don't think Lonely in the Hunter, or Lonely is the Hunter, is a generic-ass, boring, stupid track. Tell me, I'm all ears. Tell me that Murder in High Heels is worth listening to on repeat. Go ahead. I can wait for the arguments. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. Haha. Next up, coming in at number 19, it's Kiss Unplugged. And yes, I know, much like Kiss Alive 3, this is not included on the list. I'm sorry, which is not included on the list due to the fact that it adds nothing of new or significant value to the band or its history. But this one does. This has a major significance on the band's history because it's the first time Kiss performed with Ace and Peter in, 17 years or whatever it was. It set off a chain of events that would eventually morph into the biggest reunion tour of the decade. But they also performed songs as a six-piece, which led to plenty of fun moments. And for its day, I really listened to this album a lot. This was a great blend of old school and modern Kiss. I thought it was done tastefully, which is kind of strange considering the band's lack of penchant for taste, but neither here nor there. This album really catalogs their body of work by showcasing songs they wouldn't normally play. Songs like Coming Home and Plastercaster and Sure Know Something, and even Going Blind from Hotter Than Hell, which was fantastic, and they're amazing acoustic versions of these songs. And they're completely worth listening to and re-listening to. And some of the better known classics, Rock Bottom, which is a staple of past years, live shows is dusted off and brought back here. So Was I Still Love You and Do You Love Me, but the real magic is in some of the deeper tracks. A World Without Heroes, and honestly, See You Tonight from Gene's solo record. Yes, that solo record really holds up beautifully on this album. And yeah, Ace and Peter come back for a few songs. Beth, 2000 Man, Nothing to Lose, and Rock and Roll All Night cap off what might be one of the most anticipated and energetic moments in history. Don't get it twisted. This is a great record. It's only lower on the list because outside of hearing acoustic versions of rare and obscure Kiss tracks, there isn't really anything here for the casual fan to get into outside of the reunion. So if they had debuted a couple of new tracks on this record, a la Metallica when they did S&M, this album might have charted much higher on the list. And for the record, yes, they could have easily dusted off some of the old demos, like Mistake. If they had done Mistake, that would have been a perfect demo to use. Like Don't You Hesitate would have been a great, awesome demo to release as an official track on this record, an unplugged version, but I digress. Who said you can't always get what you want, right? Great record, totally worth checking out if you want to get into the deeper tracks, or if you're just curious, you won't be disappointed. Good record. Coming in at number 18, Sonic Boom. Oh yeah, Sonic Boom coming in at number 18. What can I say about this record? This is their post-retirement album. After Ace and Peter left the band for the second time, or after they were fired, depending on who you believe, Gene and Paul gave up on retirement, and they put the band back together, well, half the band back together, and they went on tour. After tour, after tour, after tour. No new content, no new album on tour, just nostalgia. So what's a nostalgia act to do? If you said, release a Walmart exclusive only record that showcases half the original band and half new guys in original makeup, including Eric Singer, who was in a previous version of the band for a few records, and was even a drummer on most of Unplugged. He was a fantastic drummer, but here, Kiss neuters him to a great degree, and that sucks. And they even told Tommy Thayer to play lead guitar and solos like Ace, which is evident all over the record, and that actually hurts the record to a great degree. Not because Tommy and Eric aren't capable musicians, they are clearly. Not showcasing their skills makes me question the guy in charge, Paul Stanley. Otherwise, this album is largely just kind of forgettable and boring. Modern Day Delilah is a decent track, Hot and Cold is okay, I'm an Animal is decent, but the rest of the songs, again, just forgettable. I'll borrow a joke from The Wedding Singer. Do you know why they canceled Happy Days? Because nobody wants to see a 60-year-old man hitting on chicks, right? The same principles apply here. We don't want to hear music like this. The music sounds dated and not in a good way. It sounds bad in a we tried too hard way. Still, it's notable for being the first Kiss release in 11 years, coming out after Psycho Circus in 1998. I rank this album a bit higher because it does hold a soft spot in my heart for whatever reason. I actually went to Walmart and bought the physical disc and came home with some Japanese re-recorded greatest hits record, which the less we speak about that, the better. I must have spun this thing 100 times trying to get into it. I just couldn't do it. But sadly, as a side effect, I know the album by heart. And I've even been known to put it on once in a blue moon just to see if it's grown more on me. And outside the other three songs that I listed, the answer is no. Again, nothing offensive here, but it's nothing musically offensive, rather, but nothing of note for being a record with huge fanfare. Coming in at number 17. And from this point, we're getting into albums that I really like to listen to. Revenge is, in my opinion, the second best non-makeup record, just my opinion, of all time. It came out maybe a couple of years too late. By the time the record had hit stores, Nirvana was just blooming in the Northwest music scene, which would pretty much spell the end of Kiss and bands like them for quite a while, at least until the mid-90s. Not that this is a bad record, because it isn't. It has some killer tracks on it, and Bruce Kulick, along with the aforementioned Eric Singer, both play like fucking monsters here. This album smokes, and I can't rate it any higher for reasons we'll get into. But I still really dig the record. So why so low? Why am I ranking this album so low? Because I like a lot of the non-makeup records. It's following a trend rather than setting, right? Granted, it's a trend I like. The trend they're following here is a hell of a lot closer to early Kiss than any of the other previous attempts. You got songs like Unholy and Heart of Chrome and Thou Shalt Not. Paralyzed is good. Good tunes. Now, again, not great tunes, but nothing else is really memorable. They brought back Vinnie Vincent to write new material from his previous firing, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it wasn't enough to save the record overall from being another mediocre album. There's plenty of schlock on this record, too. I Just Wanna, Spit, Domino, Take It Off, Tough Love. Every Time I Look at You, it's schlock. It's kind of fun, but it's schlock still. Non-hardcores can totally skip this record in my opinion. Just sue me. The other note that I would say about this record is, sadly, it ends Eric Carr's career with Kiss, as he would pass away from heart cancer in 1991, on the same day that Freddie Mercury died, which is crazy for me to think about. The tribute song on this record, called Car Jam 81, showcases Eric's amazing drumming skills. They actually took the Ace guitar parts out of the song and had Bruce re-record them for some reason. I guess maybe they wanted to keep Kiss annuity or something. Maybe they didn't want to pay Ace. Who fucking knows? But it's the same song that shows up on Ace's 87 solo record, Frehley's Comet, called Breakout. And if you really want to hear what that song was supposed to have turned into, or what it eventually morphed into, give that version a listen. It's fucking superb. But the Eric Carr drum solo does show up on the record, having been recorded. He even recorded background vocals for God Gave Rock and Roll to You, which appears on the record. So give that a check out as well. Listen to that. But that song was actually included on the album after they recorded it for Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. So you don't even have to listen to an entire Kiss record just to check out that album, that song, if you don't want to. Bless Eric Carr. Bless his family. Rest in peace. We miss you, dude. Next record. Psycho Circus. Coming in at number 16, we have the, quote, reunion album with Psycho Circus. After the reunion tour concluded in 1997, the band promised to give us a new studio record and then go on tour to support that record. And this is what we got. Years later, we'd find out that Ace and Peter were not as present for this record as they were led to believe. Most of the drum track was done by Kevin Valentine, and the lead guitar work was mostly Tommy Thayer, although Ace did show up for a few tracks. I think I ranked this record lower because of two things. The lie that it was truly the original four throughout the whole record really kind of got to me. And two, probably the bigger issue for me is it sounds like a self-congratulatory love letter to themselves rather than a kick-ass, stomp on your fucking balls, take no prisoners rock album the way it should have fucking been. Don't get me wrong. I love some of the songs here. Psycho Circus is probably just about as perfect a Kiss song as you'll get. Into the Void, which is the only song on the record that does feature all four original members playing their instruments, playing their parts, and vocals, which is awesome, and always was, according to yours truly. And I'll even admit that I like Journey of a Thousand Years with its callback to Psycho Circus in the chorus at the beginning of the album, which is really a stroke of brilliance. We Are One, that's a fun song, as is You Wanted the Best and I Pledge Allegiance. Unfortunately, I Found My Way to You is terrible, and it's It's a strong contender for top 5 bottom Kiss songs of all time. The first time I cringed, I cringed when I heard it. It's rough, man. I have to skip that song every time the album plays because I just can't. It might be one of the worst Kiss songs ever recorded, right up there with "Read My Body." The rest is okay. The record just kind of felt like a letdown. Most of the songs are about how awesome it is to be a member of Kiss or a fan of Kiss. While that's all great, honestly, some of the unreleased material would have been better. In Your Face was a badass track, and I don't know why it was only released in Japan. As was Kiss's version of It's My Life, which, frankly, I think is one of the best things they ever did. They never released. What a huge missed opportunity that was. Think about how different this record could have been. It would have been a perfect track for Psycho Circus, but I digress. I don't know anything about music. Next up. All right, in at number 15, Lick It Up. What a kick-ass record. This album was notable for being the first time the band publicly unmasked. They had a big deal on MTV where Kiss unmasked for the first time, and then they released this record, which features Kiss without makeup on the album cover. This album, much like its chronological predecessor, Creatures of the Night, got a huge unexpected musical boost despite crushing losses at home. Tanking album sales, stateside crowd and live shows dwindled while their global presence increased. Ace left the band in '82, and as such, Kiss had a bit of a crisis on their hands, having lost now half the original band, effectively fractured in half, if you will, and they needed a new guitar player, and fast. Enter Vinnie Vincent. Vinnie would wind up co-writing a lot of the material on this record and its predecessor album, Creatures. But this is the first and last record where Vinnie is actually cited as being Kiss's lead guitarist, as Ace leaving the band would send them into turmoil with their now revolving door of guitarists in the years to come. Despite all these issues, this record is pretty solid. Vinnie is a fantastic songwriter, and it shows. The band is playing music that sounds contemporary for its time, and while this has aged along with its 80s counterparts, it can't be overstated enough that without this record, Kiss might have been a footnote in popularity in the 70s that just fizzled out. So I'll state the obvious, and yeah, I think it's true. Vinnie saved Kiss. But Lick It Up sold records, right? Lots of records. People were curious how the band was going to sound after taking their makeup off, and ironically, they kind of did sound different. I mean, half the band is different. What did you expect, right? And I think I like every track on this record, with the exception of the title track. Lick It Up is just overplayed, sophomoric, simple, and stupid. It's schlock, and not in a good way. Yes, it was a minor hit for them, and they got some MTV airplay with their music video, but this was a single that was hardly what I would call comparable to the success they had in the 70s. The rest of the album is actually straight fire if you dig 80s metal. Exciter, Not for the Innocent, Young and Wasted, 1,000,000 to 1, Dance All Over Your Face, On the Eighth Day. I even like Gimme More. As cheesy as it is, it's a good M-tempo rocker that doesn't get enough credit. Great record, pretty good record, I will say that. Next up, rockin' number 14, it's Creatures of the Night. Like I said earlier, my list might be a controversial one to some. A lot of Kiss fans might have this record ranked a bit higher, and I can see why, because it's a good record, and I don't dislike any single song on the album at all. Outside of Destroyer, this album might have the best drum sound on any Kiss record ever, so it's kind of surprising that it's lower on my list, but there are other records I like more, so sue me. If you disagree with me, feel free to whine about it in the comments, where you can shout into the void of the internet to your little heart's desire. What can I say about Creatures that I didn't already say in the previous entry? Even though that's Ace on the cover, he does not play one stick of note of music on this record, not at all. This was right in the middle of Kiss's guitarist turmoil. Ace was leaving the band. He did do some promotional work for the record, some materials for the work, but was otherwise completely absent. The band tried to convince him to stay, but Ace said if he would have stayed in Kiss, he would have wound up killing himself. He was that miserable. He was constantly drunk or high, and It just wasn't a pretty sight. He was pretty dysfunctional by that point. While Vinnie Vincent does appear on the album, having co-written some of the material, he isn't alone. Other guitarists like Steve Ferris of Mr. Mister did some solo work. And there were a couple of others I'm probably missing, but it's not super important. What is important is that this record didn't sell squat. And it's because the fan base had given up to him. And the tour didn't do so well in certain markets because of the same. Meanwhile, for all the success they were lacking in the local markets and the US markets, they were exploding overseas. I think they played a show in Rio de Janeiro to 93,000 people, which is mind-boggling. But they weren't happy with their lack of success at home, and they would eventually take their makeup off in a last-ditch effort to save the band, which ultimately would work in their favor, I think. And it's sad, because this is a kick-ass record. From here on the list, there is no record that I dislike, okay? Let's get it straight. Just for the record. You know, don't come to me and go, I don't know why you had that lowered. No, I love this record. This is an underrated masterpiece of metal. Despite all the background chaos that was happening in the band, sometimes the best stuff comes out of peril. The best stuff comes out of pressure, right? As you will see later on in this list, I guarantee you. I don't know. I just work here. Anyways, Creatures, love the title track. Saint and Sinner, Rock and Roll Hell, which is a song co-written by Bryan Adams of all people. Fantastic track. I Love It Loud is badass. I Still Love You is kick-ass. War Machine is kick-ass. All of it kicks ass. Major ass. Yeah, it's dated, but it's not dated in a cheesy way or a way that feels forced or contrived. It feels like a product of its time. It feels like a band that was trying to reclaim its audience and its former glory. And despite hitting it out of the park with this record, it's clear they still had some work to do to get their fans back. I love this record, though. Love it to death. Next record. Unmasked, coming in at number 13. Controversial to put ahead of Creatures and Lick It Up? Maybe. But like I said, this is my list. And I think Pop Kiss is tops. There isn't a song in this record that I think is bad. It's certainly a quirky album, but at least it's a fun, quirky album. And that's going to be a theme coming up here, you'll see. If you want to know what Kiss sounds like as a pop band, then this record is for you. And I don't know why, but Torpedo Girl, which might be the strangest Kiss song in their catalog, is probably one of my favorite tracks on the album, along with Is That You, Shandy, Talk to Me, Tomorrow. I mean, the album might be a case of me listening to it with my eyes because the album cover rocks in a comic book sort of way. I'm a huge comic book guy. I mean, this channel is dedicated to comics. What can I say, right? But to see them drawn in panels certainly is a clever way to sell Kiss to records. Records to kids, I mean. I love it. It's so off the beaten path. It's not right in the head, and yet somehow I find myself spinning this record more and more as I get older. I must be getting soft in my old age, or this record has aged better than anyone thought it would. I think that's the latter. There are no real hits on this record aside from Shandy, but the album doesn't need any. It's just a fun little record. This would be the first record where Peter does not play drums on one single track. And like you would see later on Creatures with Ace, Peter is on the cover of this album but did not play a stick of music on it. Those duties were handled by Anton Fig, who was also the drummer on Ace's 78 and 87 solo records, and who was also the drummer on Late Night with David Letterman for years and years. I don't even have anything clever to say about this record other than it's this high on my list for a reason. But I guess you could consider this kind of a guilty pleasure more than anything else. As is this next record. At number 12, Music from the Elder. I love this record. I love the Elder so much it hurts. And I could talk about this record all damn day, but I don't have that kind of time, so let's get into the basics. After the albums Dynasty and Unmasked faced a lot of criticism, Kiss decided to do something completely out of left field that would only further alienate and confuse the fan base. And that is, you know what? Disco didn't sell, pop didn't sell. Let's make a concept record. Brilliant idea, just brilliant. So, armed with a brand new drummer, Eric Carr, who took on the persona of the Fox, they hired former Destroyer brainchild Bob Ezrin to produce the record, which made the executives happy because they thought they were going to get back to basics on this album. Well, the short story goes as this. Gene Simmons had a goofy idea to write a soundtrack for a movie that wasn't even in production and had nobody attached to it. Why, you ask? Reasons. Anyway, they decided it would be a modern-day telling of a medieval-style quest set forth by the ancient Council of the Elders. Thereby they would find Morpheus, the man-child who would champion the good cause and challenge the evil Mr. Blackwell, who was a powerful politician in Washington, D.C., who threatened to end the world with hatred or something. Does that make sense? Did you catch all that? Alright, I'm paraphrasing and I'm kidding mostly. But to say the songs on this record are kind of confusing and quirky is putting it mildly, and I guess that's what I like about it. Look, I think if you're a Kiss fan and you like flashy things and you like showmanship, that you like things that are different. Well, what's more different than this, I ask? And I realize that most Kiss fans are really divided on this record. People either seem to really love it or hate it. I'm in the camp love it. I don't listen to this record songs in the original order of release either, because I find it confusing. Listen to it in the order it was released from the 97 remasters, which starts with Fanfare and goes to Just a Boy and Odyssey. That's the best way to listen to the record, in my opinion. The best song on the record? Under the Rose, in my humble opinion. And it's sometimes tied with The Oath. I really dig The Oath, but Mr. Blackwell would get an honorable mention. Dark Light, Escape from the Island. Really, really, really solid songs. The rest of it might be too much for the casual Kiss fan to swallow, but I dig the shit out of this record. It isn't their best record by far, and, you know, nobody's going to argue that it is, but it's so noteworthy for so many reasons, a lot of which I can't get into. I know I'm running a little long here, but if you're a curious kind of person and you really have to blow your mind with how different Kiss can sound, this record is for you. Give it a spin. Coming in at number 11, topping the middle 10, if you will, is Paul Stanley's 78 solo record. Some people wouldn't have put this record as high as I did, but others might have it lower. I guess it just depends on what you like, I guess, but I do like me some Paul Stanley solo album. While this record is different than Kiss, it's still at least rooted in Kiss music, solid rock, rock and roll songwriting, which is what I think saves it and puts it so high on the list for me. I think songs like Take Me Away, they do sound epic, but the lead track, Tonight You Belong to Me, is pretty much a masterclass in how to write a simple, effective, straightforward, dynamic, classic rock song. True, it may not be Kiss in the quintessentialist category here, but it is up there in terms of spinability. Out of the 4 solo albums, it is in fact, I think, the most classic rock-ish of the 4. It's a solid record. Move On is a great song. Love in Chains and Goodbye. None of them would be out of place on a Boston or a Foghat album. Using a bevy of studio musicians and recording it in 2 different locations, New York and LA. We see some album mainstays like Bob Kulick, who handles most of the lead guitar work, but the majority of musicians who play on this record read like a who's who of session work. Most notably, I think Carmen Appice was in Vanilla Fudge, and he did a lot of studio session work with other bands there. But the best song on this record would have to be It's Alright, followed by Tonight You Belong to Me. Great, sometimes overlooked album that really does get some consistent playtime from yours truly. Up next. All right, it's top 10 time. Starting off in the number 10 position, we have Dynasty. This record was touted as the return of Kiss. In 1978, Kiss took a break from touring to record their solo records, which we've already somewhat chronicled in the other up above the list here. When they came back from that break, this is the record they created. Better or worse, right? It's often blamed for being a disco record, but I never saw it that way. It has 1, maybe 2 disco songs if you really want to count Dirty Livin' as a disco song. This is really Kiss trying to recapture the magic, which they did achieve to kind of mixed results. This was the beginning of the end for the band, though. This was the beginning of the implosion, if you will. The Ace songs on here are really worth getting the record for alone. 2000 Man is a great rockin' cover. It's a cover of a Rolling Stones song, so check out the original. I believe it's on Her Majesty's Satanic Request, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Save Your Love is one of the most underrated Kiss songs in the catalog. Hard Times kicks a lot of ass. The only songs on this record I think are kind of weak are Gene's songs. I'm not mad about X-Ray Eyes. I'm not sure Charisma is Gene's best work. That isn't to say that they're terrible songs, because they're not, but I'm just not crazy about them. Paul, on the other hand, really shines, and I think he saves this record. He and Ace saved this record a lot with the title track, or not the title track, but the lead track, I'm sorry, I Was Made for Loving You, Sure Know Something, Magic Touch. My God, Paul was on fire here. And of course, sadly, this would be the final record Peter Criss would play any drums on for 17, 18 years, or something like that. As his only contribution, Dirty Livin', it's actually a pretty decent track. It's tough and it's gritty, and it sounds like a city. It's bustling and it's busy, and it's such a bittersweet way to end the band he helped create, exit the band he helped create, rather. I still spin this album with some regularity. From here on out, I think it's safe to say not only do I like these albums, but I love these albums. Making a top tier list is hard because sometimes your favorite records have to take precedence over albums that are technically better. This is kind of what Dynasty is to me. It's a soft spot. It's not a technically brilliant album, even though it's leaps and bounds ahead of previous work, but it's not quite complete Kiss. But few people would ever point to this and tell you that it's a bad record, right? So, I love me some Dynasty, that's all I want to say. Next up. Alright, at number 9, the first of the 2 Alive records to show up on this list. Not specifically for the live content, in this case, but more so for the brand new 5-track EP, aka Side 4 of Alive 2. Which definitely deserves its own ranking. And thank your lucky stars they recorded these songs, because in my humble opinion, if this stood apart as an EP, it would kick all kinds of ass just by itself. The fact that we get live performances of the second set of studio records is just bonus, in my opinion. Regardless of where we all are in the cosmos, I think we can all agree that this EP kicks major ass. Every song is just a smoking banger. All American Man is Paul doing some of his best work. He's writing anthemic rock songs that somehow have to compete with the live versions of classic Kiss tunes that are being on the same record. And somehow it still works, right? I think Rockin' in the USA is a great song. Some people think it's schlocky, but I've always loved it. Larger Than Life is a killer track with a bass riff that'll blow your fucking balls off. Rocket Ride is Ace's second vocal contribution to a studio record, and thank God, because it kicks all kinds of ass. Sir Fraley always brought the goods back then. And of course, Any Way You Want It is a cover of an MC5 song, but it's absolutely fucking brilliant. Most of the lead work on this EP is done by Bob Kulick. Though as Rocket Ride, aside from this being only Ace's second in studio vocal performance, it's also the only work that he did for Side 4, which is kind of sad, but there are circumstances surrounding why. I don't need to get into a lot of it, but suffice to say, Ace was incapacitated on the sofa in the lobby whilst the recording of Alive 4, Side 4 was going on. So, word on the street he had the brown bottle flu, but I can neither confirm nor deny. So, either way, I'm super stoked. I don't care who played lead on it. The Side 4 of Alive 2 continues to be such a fantastic legacy amongst Kiss fans. And I think we all have a soft spot for that record, and I think it shows. Coming in at number 8, Dressed to Kill. This is Kiss's third studio album, and this record was recorded at a time when the record label was losing money hand over fist, which kind of explains the sonics on this record. I always thought the sound of this record was a bit thin. For having such badass Kiss classics. It kind of is a juxtaposition, but such as the woe of nearly all of these early Kiss records, right? In some ways, the messy production on these first 3 studio records can help add a certain charm to them, and I suppose that could be true of this album too. At least it's honest, right? Which is, I think, why it holds up. There aren't any real hits, quote unquote, on this record, save for the studio version of Rock and Roll All Night and She, but nothing else from this record is really known to people outside the Kiss bubble. And yet, still, this record holds up high on this list. Like I said, it's an honest record. And even though I think it sounds a bit thin, the rocky, rolly songwriting style here really helps pick up anything that might be lacking production-wise. Everyone on this record is playing with precision and quality. Peter Criss is absolutely destroying his drum kit. Frehley puts out some of his tastiest licks ever. Getaway is a great song. In fact, I think every song on this record is a great song. The only way I could describe this record to a casual fan would be, imagine Elvis Presley being played through a Marshall guitar amplifier. That's Dressed to Kill. It's just plain old-fashioned good time rock and fucking roll. Room Service, 2-timer. Ladies in Waiting. Rock Bottom is spectacular. Come On and Love Me is great. Of course, She and Lover All I Can came from Gene and Paul's previous band, Wicked Lester, and are given the full Kiss treatment here to much delight. In fact, She is my favorite song on the record. In some ways, it sounds a bit different musically than the rest of the songs on the record, but sometimes it's nice to get a sludgy break from the pomp and circumstance of the rocky, rolly bits. So, I can't say enough good things about this record. I never skip a song when I play it, ever. Coming in at number 7, we have Destroyer. Now, this might be a shock to some people that this record isn't higher on the list. But again, competition, right? I like everything here on this list, so it's all relative. I still love this record a lot. I can listen to this record today, even though I think it's largely overplayed. True, I don't spin it as much as I used to, but there's no denying that this record has more material that the casual fan knows than any other record in their catalog, save for maybe one other record, but we'll talk about that in a bit. I think Detroit Rock City, the lead-off track, might be my favorite Kiss song of all time, and the fact that it's followed up by King of the Nighttime World and God of Thunder, I mean, geez Louise. Talk about an eagle on a par 4, right? I even like Great Expectations, as cheesy as it can be. Of course, I think Beth is overplayed. I know it's their biggest hit, but it really sounds nothing like the band, really. I sort of liken it to the Grateful Dead fans who hate Touch of Grey because it's nothing like the rest of their catalog. Make no mistake, Beth catapulted them to the top of the charts, and it's not out of place on the album, but to many fans, it was not Kiss. And neither was the rest of the record, at least in the beginning. Hardcore fans hated this record when it first came out. Because, again, the record didn't sound like Kiss. If you hold this record up against Dressed to Kill, one of these things is not like the other. And of course it didn't. It didn't sound like Kiss. It sounded like Kiss through the prism of Bob Ezrin, who would produce the record and would be responsible for engineering the sonic explosion which would happen. It was sort of against the grain of its studio predecessor, right? But both of the records somehow sound distinctively different, and yet somehow it's all Kiss, right? It works. Destroyer starts off with some intro of some dude watching TV, and I don't know, maybe his mom or his boyfriend is washing the dishes. I don't know. And then he leaves the house and starts his car, and there's this whole thematic sound that surrounds Detroit Rock City that gives it an aura. It just sort of makes it epic. And the Kiss fans just weren't ready for something like this, I think. It was too slick for them. But eventually, once the hit broke, once Beth broke through, they found a casual audience, then it was game, set, match. Then this record really took off. It was kind of a 1-2 punch from Alive to Destroyer. The one thing that I have to say about this record is that Ace is notably missing. Not that he doesn't play on the record. I mean, he does, but it's a bit of there's a bit of conjecture here. He doesn't play the solo on Sweet Pain. That was outsourced to Dick Wagner. But it's not just that. There's not a lot of freely penned soloing on this record. At least none that really showcase his talents in the same way that Dress to Kill or Rock and Roll Over or Love Gun would do. Hotter Than Hell would do. It just doesn't feature him a lot, which, you know, for whatever reason, I don't know why they did it, right? Either that or it doesn't stop. But it's even that being the case, it doesn't stop the album from being kick-ass, right? It's a landmark record, and one that the band continues to play songs on live from this day. Over half of their set list is from this record, it seems like. Which, you know, should say something. Anyways, next album. Coming in at number 6, it's the debut record. I'm sure some people will be offended that this album is lower than it is, but calm down. Again, I don't hate the record. I love it. I just love other Kiss records more. The first record is probably one of the more popular albums of the catalog. I mean, just by its virtue, it's the first album. And I agree with you that this thing fucking smokes. From the drum intro of Strutter to the down-tuned guitar outro of Black Diamond, the songs on this record are practically built for live performances. Most of these songs are and were staples of the live shows all the way from the beginning to the end. Things like Deuce and maybe my favorite live Kiss songs of all time, 100,000 Years in Black Diamond. Both are fantastic and still played today. Cold Gin, Firehouse, that record really speaks for itself. I do think there's some clunker or two on here. Nothing that I ever skipped though. I'm not big on Kissin' Time. It doesn't sound like the rest of the album. It sounds like it was recorded for Hotter Than Hell. I would actually swap Kissin' Time with She, if you catch my drift. Or Watching You. I would have put Watching You on the debut album too, but neither here nor there. I'm also not fond of Acrobat, but you know, I always thought Acrobat sounded like the ad break music on some boring-ass morning talk show. But the other tracks on here, cream of the crop Kiss, that's for sure. Some of the more underrated tracks on here, like Let Me Know and Nothing to Lose, are definitely worth checking out too. Both of these songs appear on other subsequent Kiss records, but so, I mean, if you've already scoped them out, there's a great chance for you here to catch the original recordings, but once again, I digress. Anyways, great record. Love that record. Spin it, spin it, spin it. Next up. In at number 5, it's Hotter Than Hell. I freaking love Hotter Than Hell. Easily my favorite of the first 3 studio records. And I say that despite the sonic issues this record has. And let's talk about that for a second. If you've never heard this record before, it's something else, right? It's harsh and it's abrasive sounding. It's kind of like the audio equivalent of sandpaper across your taint. But hear me out. These songs are brutally kick-ass. This record gets heavy with badass songs like Watching You and Parasite and Strange Ways, and even Going Blind is a sludgy, trudgy ballad about an old man who falls in love with a mermaid. Yep, that's the kind of songwriting on this record that I think speaks volumes. Largely due to the fact that they were nearly out of material, so they were just plugging shit to the wall. But again, another trend is set. When you're here under pressure, sometimes the best things come from it, you know? This album still turned out fucking awesome. This record does have some straightforward rockers, like the title track, All the Way in Mainline. Even some proto-alternative stuff is on this record, like Coming Home and Got to Choose. In fact, I always thought this record was a proto-alternative record. It got such an eclectic, unique mix of music that alone should be sufficient, but, you know, anyways. This is clearly a band that's been playing for a little while now, and it shows. The sessions here are tighter. The creative expression is in peak play here, largely because they really had nothing to lose. It's gloomy and poppy and rocky and rolly where it needs to be. And I just think this is the quintessential original OG alternative rock album. Overall in the record industry, it doesn't get much better than this. In my humble opinion, best of the first 3 studio records. Love it to death. Coming in at number 4, it's Love Gun. And what can I say about the awesomeness of this album? I mean, just look at it. Everything about it screams rock and roll, and that's even before you put the record on the turntable. When you play the music, it's not too bad either, right? I love every song on here except the title track. I have to admit, I am burnt out on Love Gun. You know, I think we all have our songs that we're kind of burnt out on as Kiss fans. It's not unusual. After spinning these songs for 50 plus years, I can tell you honestly, you know, you get bored of some stuff, but neither here nor there. I can still listen to it, and it's okay if it's part of the record as a whole, but it never gets put on as a single in Casa AB. But the rest of the record, holy shitballs, is this thing fucking wicked. The title track is just made to open a live show or start a record, but Got Love for Sale, Shock Me is incredible, Hooligan is badass, Even Then She Kissed Me is a cover song, but it's badass. In fact, the only other song on this record that's maybe questionable by today's PC standards and the PC police is Christine 16. Now, I am not advocating pedophilia, but it's a shame that the song's lyrics don't work in today's gotcha culture because the music to the song is fucking banging. It's a banger of a song, right? It's only unfortunate because the music is so kick-ass. I wish it had different lyrics, but you know, having said that, I can't say enough good things about this record. I listen to this thing all the time, and it's probably the best sounding of all the original Kiss studio records, which helps it out quite a bit in my rankings. Not that this album's overall production quality is hurt by anything on the list, but it is a consideration. All you have to do is listen to it. Everything on this record is so crisp and clean. Do yourself a favor and check out this gem. Just ignore the lyrics to Christine 16, and don't turn me into the cancel culture police. Coming in at number 3, it's the OG Alive. This fucking record smokes. Let's say you were brand new to Kiss's music, and you asked me, AB, where is the best starting point for me as a brand new guy who wants to get into the Kiss experience? I would tell you, start with Alive, which is sort of like a greatest hits double live record compilation album. I don't know if that's a fancy way of saying it, but it has some of the best songs from the first 3 studio records captured in live format. Alive was really the benchmark that set the standard for every live rock record that came after it. Since there aren't any new songs on this record, I can't really talk about notable content other than to say that they weren't aiming to sell new material, but they were aiming to give you a bit of an experience of what it was like at their live shows. And I think that some of the best versions of Kiss classics are on this record. This is true. Let Me Go Rock and Roll from Alive was Elvis Presley's favorite Kiss song. I bet you didn't know that. Actually, I think it might have been the only Kiss song Elvis ever heard, but it doesn't make it less true. I mean, that would have to make it his favorite by default. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But 100,000 Years, Black Diamond, Deuce, Got to Choose, Strutter, Cold Gin, they're all here in spectacular live fashion. This is the record that put Kiss on the map. In my humble opinion, it's the best live album ever released. You can almost smell the flash pots and weed when you put this record on. 2 big, giant thumbs all the fucking way up. Next record. In at the number 2 spot, it's the 5th studio record by Kiss, Rock and Roll Over. From the spinning acoustic riff that starts it off to the last guitar solo on the record, this is the single greatest studio Kiss record of all time. Just my humble opinion. I Want You, kick-ass opener, followed right up with Take Me, another great tune. In fact, I think the only hits on this record would be Calling Dr. Love and Hard Luck Woman. But if that's all you're listening to, you're really missing the boat on this record. The funny thing is, this album was hastily made after a backlash against Destroyer. They thought they had made a mistake when they first released Destroyer, and that album was too slick. The fans, were up in upheaval about it. So they went into the studio in a couple of months after the fact and literally banged out what would be the most cracking record in their catalog, according to me. They were hungry to reclaim their audience here, and it shows from the artwork, which is my favorite Kiss album artwork, by the way, to the highest quality of songs. I guess it's true. sometimes the best stuff comes from pressure, and this album is proof. Check out Ladies Room, Take Me, Mr. Speed, Making Love, the latter of which suffers from a bit of Christine 16itis, but, you know, the lyrics aren't really passable by today's strict cancel culture, but fuck those assholes. I'll listen to whatever the fuck I want. And I always want to listen to Rock and Roll Over because it's the best studio album Kiss ever did. And if you're keeping track of that at home, I think all of you guys at home know what album is number one. The Ace Frehley solo album in at number one. Who would have guessed the greatest Kiss album of all time? That Ace Frehley solo record would be it. There is just no other record from the Kiss label that I spin more as a kid or as an adult. Let's get it clear right now. This is not just a good Kiss record. This is a good record, period. From the opening riff on Rip It Out to the church bells of Fractured Mirror, this whole record smokes fucking hard. It was the only solo album to produce a hit, New York Groove, which is a song I will never get tired of hearing. Other songs like Ozone and Speedin' Back to My Baby were covered by the likes of the Foo Fighters and the Donnas respectively. Other bands like Anthrax and Skid Row members have covered other album classics like Snowblind, which is super heavy and badass. And I guess that's the thing that makes the record so great to me. It goes from a rock album to a bit of a bluesy sound, and then right into some heavy fucking tunes with Ozone and some spacey direction music with Wiped Out. Goes into a bit of a pop direction with What's on Your Mind. Just so many great songs. Wiped Out goes from a poppy, happy, bright sounding song to something that's gloomy and doomy all in the same track, and it somehow feeds into this overall narrative of what alcohol really does to you. It's amazing. It's amazing. Even What's on Your Mind, which I think is the weakest track on the record, is fucking sublime. This record, more than any other record in its same category, is more Kiss-like than any of the other solo records, and it shows. God, what else can I say about it? I almost guarantee if you spin it, you'll agree. You don't have to be a Kiss fan to love this record. This thing is fucking outstanding. Ace's vocals, right, and I'll say this about the record, might be a little hit or miss for some people. And it's true, you know, they're more stylized than Gene or Paul or Peter's vocals are going to be. Nobody is accusing Ace of being an operatic soprano. But if you're interested in finding out what real kick-ass 1970s rock and roll was really all about, this is the fucking record for you. And that's it. That's the list. I hope you enjoyed it, and if there's something you disagree with, or if you just want to leave a nice note in the comment section, I would appreciate it. I might even respond to a nice note. Hell, I'll respond to a shitty note if you leave me one. That's all, folks. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back next time when we get back to our DC Comics with our new Comic Book Club series, which will be coming up here shortly. For the rest of the All-Stars, this is the AB saying, so long, everybody.